All right, welcome back. We are now on part 3 of our review that started with an unboxing and a testing of this car, unboxing in the four-wheel drive state of this Slot.it CW17 2013 Le Mans winning livery. So we're going to check out all the things that led to this tune and all things in between, as there were some definite trials and tribulations along the way. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get this car on our block here and take a look. So this car started out as a flat 6 with angle winder, still stayed an angle winder, but with the four-wheel drive system. So when we take a look under the body here, it also started out with the somewhat awkward Le Mans prototype guide. And so really at this particular point in time, we were able to put on that wonderful solution that was created. And you can see that there's a 3D printed piece of plastic in there. It snaps into place. It creates the same stops that we're familiar with for the guide, the pickup, whatever you like to refer to. And it allows for a standard guide pretty much of any variety, whether you like slot invasion, slotting plus, whether you want to put a wood guide that's from Slot.it. This is a slotting plus SP10101 with the standard screw that comes with it. I love the screw that comes with it. I believe I have a .01 spacer underneath there, and I have replaced the motor wires, but I have used the eyelets that came with the guide. And so overall, you can see that I have dremeled away that connection that normally would have been a connection between the chassis and the guide screw, and then I have basically whittled away all the rest of the plastic and now have turned it into essentially a familiar gooseneck that usually we would see. Which brings us to the wonderful solution that Henri Ravenstein created, and Greg Gobb hosted the 3D print file for me. A great collaboration here. Please check out their YouTube pages as well. The link's down below, but I wanted to give them credit for this. Just a great snap-in design. I glued mine in, and it provides exactly what we need, the ability to put a regular guide into these cars. Wonderful, wonderful solution. The front axle. Interesting thing about this car, where there's an idea that the front axle, independent front axles are going to allow the travel of the tire load to be split differently, because as we know, when you're going through a turn, the inside, if this was the inside tire, certainly travels a lot less than the outside tire. Well, in this particular case, you'll notice that these were the tires that came with the four-wheel drive system, and therefore they have a clutch, a plastic clutch that surrounds, or a clutched wheel, if you will, that surrounds the aluminum wheels that are in there. You can see it better when you look through this tire here. You can see the outline of the black plastic. And essentially what it allows to have happen is one wheel can be held and the other tire will still spin. The other plastic wheel will still spin around that clutched system. And so in theory, it's certainly allowable. It's certainly legal if anybody wants to buy these and add them to their aftermarket, as an aftermarket addition to their car on this track at Hobbit Racing Park. I certainly would not discourage that if they wanted to go ahead and give it a try. I'm certainly taking advantage of it here. Whether there's any real advantage to it or not, that lends itself to be seen in the future. Set screw axle, got your grub screws in here, and then you have them coming up through the bottom. Again, something to note, this car sat in a box for a long time, typical to what I've seen on many cars. I didn't necessarily expect it to happen to multiple, but both the inner axle blocks, if you'll allow the expression for those blocks down there where the set screw comes from the bottom up, both of them failed, and at different times while I was testing and tuning, I took my car off the track and the axle was just straight up wobbly. Thankfully, at least my grub screw didn't fall all the way out on the track, a little bit of CA glue inside of there and then threading them back up through it, and they seem to stay put. I think we've got about 3 grams, 3.5 grams here. Pretty thin piece right here. As far as it goes, apparently it worked out so well that I hadn't even gone back and removed the rest of the backing paper. Call it superstition. As we make our way to the back of the car, class-driven, slotted MX-16, could be a Piranha as well. But this is where we start to get into the details of this car and all of the engineering inside the car that I had to deal with. This car comes with that flat 6 as made mention, and you have this fluted back, so you really can't change it to inline. Otherwise, you'd have to cut not only next to this fluted back, but with the low back of the body, you'd have to cut a hole right there for the crown to split through. So I tried to keep it angle winder, but then of course, the taller short can motor hits the body. So you can see, hopefully the light allows you to see some of the work that I did. I did quite the bit of work to scallop that out as best I can. Ironically, another consequence that I hadn't planned on, but was probably the way the four-wheel drive system sat inside the car, and then me adjusting the axle over time. Well, I started driving with the brakes on. Lo and behold, I thought I had something with my original tune, and then I didn't realize it, and I started taking a look, and I literally started just simply like I had a circular saw running inside my wheel well. I started cutting the body. So I went through some other aspects, not realizing that was what it was, replaced the motor at one point, did some other work on the car, and essentially detuned it and then retuned it. But one of the other important things to note about this configuration with the taller short can motor is I ended up scalloping away the top of the motor as best I could, continuously taking this motor back to some leads to make sure I wasn't doing any damage to the actual lead wire connections that then touch the brushes, that then touch the commutator inside, and everything worked out great. And then another piece that you'll notice on here as well, again, the profile, the low profile, or to keep this as low profile as possible, I have soldered the motor leads underneath. I have also used the CG adapter that works so well to put a short can motor in a long can pod. However, if you'll notice, I have taken and low profiled that to almost the same height, if not lower, for the motor wire to be seated. I've actually taken the CG adapter much lower than the motor, but therefore the motor wire also sits lower than the can itself. All of these things for the sake of trying to achieve body float, trying to get the body to sit as flat as possible on top of this car, knowing, on top of this chassis, pardon me, knowing that the fluted sides and the low back were going to be an issue. Otherwise, you know, I've got some spacers in here to try and create some, you know, good spacing. Otherwise, again, I added some more here, not realizing that I was originally rubbing the body. Had never given, you know, a second thought to it. This is a standard, you know, I believe 1mm offset pod that comes with these. Thought nothing of that spur gear being up against, you know, albeit at one spacer in there. And now I think I've stacked at least 2 or 3 spacers in there. I can't remember the exact size of the spacers that I have in there, but I'm no longer driving with the brakes on finally. And CB34Fs in the back, again on the original slotted rims, CB34Fs, and then on the front, I think I missed talking about that. These are NSR zero grips. I believe they're 5226 zero grips. I like to keep the profile in my LMP and my Group C cars the same. I wasn't aiming for this to be a smaller profile on here versus the back, so the CB34F and the 5226 end up coming about to be the same diameter when it's all said and done in terms of that. So you have the NSR and then you have the quick slick in the back. Yes to the motor pod screws, of course, keeping yourself stable. And we landed at 1127, 2.45. In the rear, we also have removed the magnet and we have put a thick piece, I think it's about 1.5 grams, in there first, surrounded and sandwiched, pardon me, with a much bigger piece and thicker piece of lead here, as well as a very thick piece of lead right here in the back. All in all, planting the rear of the car because of the very low numbered but yet high gear ratio itself. I guess low gear ratio, high gearing, taking off at 2.45. Oftentimes I set up cars between 2.6 and 2.7 on this track, and you don't have to put as much weight in them. But if you're going to take off with pace, the car needs to be planted. So you've got quite a bit of weight there. I think combined with those 3 pieces of weight, that's somewhere in the order of 5+ grams, maybe 4+ grams of weight right there underneath the rear axle, or right there about the rear axle. So that's it, really. Again, simple stuff, you know, adjusting the float here to make sure things are where I want it to be from a float standpoint, and then love the strapping tape to add that little bit of dimension to the suspension for me. NSR super soft braid. Again, we talked about the guide. Again, set the set this where you want to. Get your guide low enough, and again, these tires might not be touching the surface on a setup block, but they certainly roll on the track, and that's the rules. Your front tires must roll when they're on the track. So, a little bit of an overview there. Happy to share this tune. I don't always take the lid off and share all of the tunes when I'm going through it, but this was something interesting, especially removing the flat 6 and doing all the body work underneath unexpectedly. Taking a circular saw with the spur gear to the underside of the body and driving with the brake on for a little bit while doing so. But overall, the car turned out just as expected. I didn't expect anything less than a speedy car once I removed the four-wheel drive and did all the typical things that I would do to a Slot.it. Very easy to tune. Unfortunately, like I said, I got tricked by that driving with the brake on with that gear grinding underneath the body, and I tore the tune down completely, didn't realize that it was that. Even went through the steps of replacing the motor, thinking that I had damaged the motor when I had scalloped out some of the end bell piece, and it wasn't. But overall, I'm thrilled, and we will take it to the track next.